Whew, it's been a while. I wanted to tell you guys about this phenomenal movie called Crip Camp. It details disability rights history, how the disability rights movement came to be, and how the Black Panthers helped disability rights protesters in the movement. Oh, and this movie is entirely free to watch on YouTube currently. So this movie takes place in the 70s and it features direct accounts from the leaders of the movements and protests as well as videos and photos. So it all started at this camp called Camp Gen Ed. Camp Gen Ed was actually founded in the 1950s, but the movie takes place in the 70s as that's when the protesters attended the camp in 1971 to be exact. And in 1977, that is when the disability rights movement protest took place for the 504. So it all started at Camp Gen Ed. And what Camp Gen Ed is, it is a camp for people with disabilities, people being adults and teenagers, both male and female. They had like a teenage camp over here, and then over here they had a separate adult camp. And the disabilities were any of all types, from verbal to nonverbal, of all levels, of all disabilities. And at the time, Camp Gen Ed was pretty much paradise for people with disabilities. They could play sports, they could play games, they could make friends, they had alone time, uh, they had access to booze and cigarettes, and it's the 70s, very little to no restrictions and regulations. They let you do whatever you wanted out there. At the camp, everyone felt heard, seen, loved. Everybody felt quote unquote normal. Like they actually felt like they belonged. Like they could make friends with anyone. Also, just want to point out this movie is rated R, and there are some wild stories. Like they were having a great time, a ball out in that forest. So I can only say, like, you gotta be 18 plus to watch this one, because like they were, they told some tales. So when the campers got back home, they were met with government discrimination, societal barriers, and really just hate for having a disability. Like, it was terrible. And at this camp, when I tell you, you can have any disability and still participate, they had people picking each other up, people with disabilities helping other people with disabilities. Like, wherever disability you had, another person would be able to support that person and help them to participate in the sports, no matter what the activity is, no matter if they're going to the lake, if they're swimming, if they're playing sports, anything, everything. Some of the counselors didn't have disabilities, and it's so funny. They talk about in the movie, some of the counselors, their very first experience working, or not even working, meeting, seeing a person with disabilities, aside from like a picture, like in person, was at that camp. And to see so many people with disabilities all at once, they could not believe it. It was like a dream. So at camp, they felt appreciated, loved, and uplifted uh, by the community, essentially. And they never thought life could be so great. Trigger warning slash sensitive topic coming up, by the way. Going to talk a lot about mental institutions and uh, mistreatment of people with disabilities. So at the time in the 70s, and honestly before the 70s, um, it was normal to send kids with disabilities or teenagers or adults, really any, to mental health institutions, uh, Yeah, like the government would literally go around and tell families like you're doomed, your kid's doomed. All you can do is send them to a mental health institution. And um yeah, that was the norm. Like that they would send these kids to these mental health institutions. Some were called schools, some were called institutions. They call them whatever, but it was horrible. So this is Willowbrook State School. It was a school slash institution in the 70s that was open. And any professional in this field probably knows this school very well. So in these institutions where they send kids of any disability, of any severity, it could be mild, could be severe. They don't use severe anymore. They use like levels and things. But uh, any disability, no matter how much support you need, if you need little support or a lot of support, they sent kids to these schools and gave them little to no support. Not only were they left without support, but they were often abused, neglected, or left starving. And how they end up starving is when a person who needs support to be able to facilitate the uh, eating properly and safely gets no support, they either eat too little or eat too much and then throw it up. And these all of these people weren't getting any support with their eating, so that's how starving came about in these situations. And their angle is, well, they're all given equal treatment and equal access to food and bedding, so what's wrong with that? Also, these people have any disability, so they're automatically doomed. So, what's wrong with that? But it's like an issue of equality versus equity. Equally, they all have the same access to support, but they need, or sorry, not support. Equally, they have the same access to things, I guess, but without the support and like, I don't, just the humanity to of help, they're going to be doomed essentially. And thank God these schools are closed now. I just want to take a second to shed some light on that because that is an atrocity that no one knows about, to be honest. But back to the movie. So when they came back home and saw that life could be so much better than what it was at the time, they fought and protest and fought for so much legislation. Eventually, through their efforts and, of course, other protesters of the civil rights movement, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 was passed that businesses and jobs cannot bar access to people with disabilities simply for having a disability. But wait, the movie doesn't end there. The same protesters that were protesting back in 1972 and in 1973 ended up protesting and doing sit-ins in government buildings in 1977 to pressure the government to actually take the law serious. And there were many sit-ins, but the longest sit-in was 23 days. I'm going to talk more about this on this channel later, but these sit-ins were led by camper Judith Herman or Human. I think it's Human. Not sure. But she's on the far right in the picture, and you learn so much about her in the movie. The result from all the sit-ins and the protests were that the government finally caved and funded public businesses and schools to provide support for people with disabilities. I don't know if I sold this movie to you yet, but go check it out. Great movie, very inspiring, awesome, very informative. Glad to be back. Follow for more.